Hello, welcome in to another edition of Musings from the Mountains, the video podcast presented by WVSports.com. I am Keenan Cummings, and I'm joined by,
Serre, as always.
yes, a tag team like no other. West Virginia had a defensive effort like no other today, absolutely demolishing Kansas on that side of the ball. Mountaineers held Kansas 157 total yards. That's yards, 157 total yards. That's the lowest output that West Virginia's defense has allowed since 2014. That was against Townsend, so we're not really going to count that one. You got to go all the way back to 2005 against Connecticut to find a performance that the West Virginia defense held a team to fewer yards. Just a dominant effort, really outside of kind of a flukish touchdown and a short field that led to a field goal. They got 63 yards on their first two possessions. They had 93 yards, I believe, for the rest of the 94 yards for the rest of the game. That's 94 yards over 13 possessions. Jared, what did you think of that defense today?
Well, in regard to Kansas, I mean, it's almost like you have to try to be that bad. But I mean, we've seen Kansas over the past 4 years, and they really are, unfortunately, that bad. But West Virginia's defense, again, top notch. I know a lot of blue lotters may not appreciate this, but Vic Koenig, Josh Chandler absolutely killed it. Tony Fields killed it, as always. Alonzo Adai, phenomenal job. It was a great all-around effort, and they really needed that. They really need a good, strong effort from a defense. Defense wins championships. West Virginia will not win the college football playoff, but having a good defense, especially in the Big 12, will help them tremendously.
Yeah, West Virginia came into this game first in the Big 12 in yards allowed per game, second in points scored per game on defense. Both those totals are going to go down. They're actually going to improve after this effort, which when you get into game 4 and you're improving, that's usually a good thing. So I had to lead with the defense here. West Virginia won this football game. Let's make that clear. West Virginia won 38-17 today. The offense scored 38 points. They rolled up 544 yards. That's the third most of the Neil Brown era, but it didn't seem like it. It really didn't. The offense had a lot of issues, inconsistency. Sans Letty Brown. I mean, Letty Brown, he's phenomenal. Downtown Letty Brown, let it go. He's been absolutely phenomenal all year long. Continued that play today. A dominant effort. 18 carries, I think it was 195 yards and a touchdown. That's over 10 yards per coach. It's ridiculous. He added another 36 and a touchdown through the air. But the rest of the offense has some issues. Still, though, West Virginia did what it needed to do. It beat a Kansas team that it was clearly better than. Didn't start out the way you wanted to. That game started out 10-0. You're sitting there thinking, oh, man, how big is that crow going to be that me and you are going to have to eat after we really kind of uncharacteristically sidestepped and almost ignored Kansas in our preview. But West Virginia figured things out and righted the ship in a way that really you'd expect. And not for that late kickoff, they would have covered, which I thought they were going to, but they didn't, unfortunately. That'll probably make a bad beat segment. But I think that overall, did you see anything today either alarming or encouraging outside of the defense, Jared?
Outside of the defense, I think the biggest concern for me was, obviously the slow start was, awful. I was here starting to think that I'm going to have to run to the grocery store after the game and get some Old Bay or something to put on my crow. But, I think one of my biggest issues was the early turnover on the first possession that, resulted in a field goal with, a Kansas field goal. If my math is correct, that is 20 points that the Mountaineers have allowed off of turnovers so far this season. They didn't have any turnovers in Eastern Kentucky, so it's really 20 points over the past 3 games. Not a large amount of points in the grand scheme of things if you total all the opposing points, but that is still a lot. And I think that it was just a field goal against a team like Kansas, but if you're playing a much more high-powered offense, that could end up being two touchdowns, 3 touchdowns. I think that's something that they're going to need to work on as the season goes on.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as I was last week. Self-inflicted mistakes, miscues, turnovers, things that West Virginia has to avoid. They once again struggled with penalties in this game. West Virginia, I think they were flagged 8 times. I think it was for around 80 yards, and that's after having 100+ yards the last 2 games before that. And that doesn't even count into the total the hidden yards that West Virginia lost. They lost a bunch of field position on some of those mistakes. Some procedural things that West Virginia, yeah, you can get away with doing that against Kansas. I guess you can get away with doing that against Baylor, but you're not going to be able to get away with doing that against some of these teams that are left on this schedule. You're just not, unless you're incredibly lucky or the defense just continues to play at a pace that would almost be historic at this point for West Virginia. So
Yeah.
I think that you got to iron that out. You got to find a way to do it. And as I said, you look at the final offensive numbers, Jared Dagey, I mean, you look at his numbers over the year, they're really good. I mean, you're satisfied with them, but when you watch him play, it just seems like something it's not just his fault. It's protection issues at times. It's receivers dropping catchable balls, but there just seems to be something that has not clicked yet. And I think if you're a West Virginia fan, you're kind of excited that, when things do come together for this offense, how good can this football team be? You're sitting at 3-1 right now with, I think, no question, at least on paper, the best defense in the Big 12. You have an offense that has plenty of question marks, but you're still managing to score points and put up yards and beat some people. What does this team look like when it's a finished product? Or can it become a finished product this year? Sometimes teams are what they are, and they don't get any better. But if they can, I wrote about it last week in the 3-2-1. Why not West Virginia this year? And I'm not saying that basing this off a Kansas game. I think everybody expected West Virginia to win this game. But given what you've seen over 4 games and given what you've seen in the Big 12 conference as a whole, I think West Virginia is a legitimate contender, especially if you can go out. You got to win on the road next week at Texas Tech. That's not going to be easy. I don't care if they're 1-3. I don't care if they've struggled. You got to beat a Kansas State team at home that doesn't have their starting quarterback. You do that, you're sitting at 5-1. Looking at the last 4 games, you have a real shot if you're West Virginia.
See, Keenan, it's not often that you and I disagree, but I'm going to disagree with you on this one here. I mean, quite simply, we're pretty much halfway through the season. Yes, this West Virginia team is not a finished product, but regardless of what else is going on in the Big 12, they just seem to have so many different issues and struggles that they seem to, week over week, they just can't really solve them. And I mean, while they did come out with a win today, I considered today's performance itself to be a huge loss. You're looking at all the drops, all the mental mistakes. It was an ugly football game, and they continuously play ugly football games. I understand the point of why not West Virginia, and it's games like this that it seems like every week they play like this. And it's primarily a big loss this week because, as you mentioned, they're playing Kansas. Baylor beat them by 40-something points. West Virginia beat Baylor. At the very least, it should be a confidence-building game. West Virginia comes out and they pretty much laid an egg. They started off slow, and really the game was a lot closer than the score was. I mean, it's just crazy. We've seen though that 2020 has been crazy. So who knows? If I will gladly eat the crow if I sit here and say West Virginia, it's not their year, I will gladly eat the crow if they go on and finish 9-1 and are Big 12 champions. But I just don't see it.
Yeah, 9-1 might be a stretch, but all you got to do is make it into that title game. And I don't think there's any team in this league right now, even Oklahoma State, you could point to that has played great all season. I think a lot of that has to do with the product at large. No off season, a lot of things. A lot of teams are really behind schedule right now, and defense, as you mentioned earlier, defense wins championships. And if West Virginia can shut down Oklahoma State the way they did outside of a few run busts, I know they had their backup quarterback. Still, if they could shut that offensive skill set down, they could probably do it to quite a few other teams in this league. So I'll be interested to see what happens. I think on the road at Texas Tech, I'd be willing to say this is, if not the biggest game of the season, one of the biggest games of the season, because it's a game West Virginia should win, but it's on the road against a team that has really underperformed to date. And if you go and win that game, you've got a lot of confidence moving forward. So we'll see what happens. We'll be here to preview it for you later this week. West Virginia won, though. Anytime you win, it's a good day. It doesn't matter how it is. It doesn't matter how it looks. If you win ugly, it's still an ugly win is always better than an ugly loss.
Of course.
But nothing about this podcast is ugly. So tune in again next time. This has been another edition of Musings from the Mountains.